Good morning, Dr. Brad.
Doolittle, it's always a pleasure to sit with you. We have fresh coffee.
Yes, I've the smoke is for the audience. I did what I normally do, which is I set out to cook something, put the pan on to heat it up, probably put some olive oil in it to get it started, and probably forgot that I was doing it.
Didn't realize it was tinder.
And then I looked up and the house was full of smoke. Anyway, so I'm correcting that a little bit. That was my little morning bit of excitement. But God forbid that I'm going to be responsible for pulling 85 little old ladies out
Oh my.
into the, I mean, out into the cold in the courtyard.
What's the weather like there, Gert?
It's cold, isn't it? Alexa, what's the temperature?
Right now, it's 34 degrees Fahrenheit.
34 Fahrenheit.
It's set to high 38 degrees.
You don't get, I miss, the one thing I miss about the Northwest is that you get 2 months of summer, maybe a month of winter, and everything else is spring and fall. That means it rains too damn much, but you don't get too much cold. You don't get any real cold. I mean, you guys get real cold down there, don't you?
No, the cold gets down to 20. It doesn't get much colder than that, and it doesn't get there for very long, just at nighttime, and not bad.
Well, so how are you this morning? You look dapper this morning.
I'm all ready to go again, and I don't know. I just it's like pondering the collapse of the I unfortunately happen to be too intricately connected to the collapse of the post-war liberal settlement. And it is like there's all kind of debris falling all around, and it's like the civilization has to recollect itself.
Yes.
And it's problematic. So there's a great deal of confusion that is and turmoil and tumult associated with that, and it's like it happens to be a little bit too close to me, which is just problematic. And it's just, so what? Move along, keep moving, right? And so I read the news and I'm like, okay, and ponder my own place in the world and try to make good of it. That's all. It's just a mess, such a mess, man.
I don't know. I mean, the war's been interesting, and that it ended with false promise.
How so?
Well, I mean, if you're a historian, you say, well, the conflict of civilizations is going to reemerge. If you're a student of history, again, in economic history, you're going to say that the trade without the asymmetric power of either America or Rome for the British Empire. And those are three asymmetries that exist for interesting reasons, right? It's partly cultural, partly geographic, and partly technological. And it's really the combination of three. And so you say, well, if the world order that the United States created in the post-war period by taking over the British Empire, at least its institutions, has created an artificial Pax Americana,
Yep.
Which created the presumption that was a normal rather than an extreme outlier.
It's been 3 generations, right?
Right, so that's what people do. They take it for granted as soon as it's possible within living memory to take it for granted. Right, so so since it's been 3 generations or so, or 4 now, and it's within living, it's passing from living memory, right, among the people who are numerous today. Then the fantasy has become a presumption of reality. But the United States could only, the US, like Rome, like the British Empire, could only afford to pay for these Pax Romana, Pax Britannia, and Pax Americana. You can only pay for these pieces by asymmetry that we no longer possess. And we no longer possess it largely because of the post-war undermining of our civilization from within by the Jewish and feminine revolt against that order. In other words, they have taken advantage. They ran with the false promise that this extreme that had been made possible by extraordinary force, cultural discipline, and economic prosperity, that was the new normal, rather than that they could take advantage of, rather than a product of the previous behaviors that they were seeking to undermine. And so you end up here with this deterministic outcome, but you can't time it, right? So I can look at this and say it's going to happen. I can't time it, but it's going to happen. You can have a Turchin look at it from his perspective. Me look at it from my basically power perspective, trade and power perspective. And so you can look at it from the conflict of civilization. I mean, this is what I mean, synthetic historian. In other words, any historian of comparative civilization,
Yes,
must come to the same conclusion. And the answer is all of us do. All of us do. All of us come to the same conclusion.
right.
Now,
It's awful.
Well,
It's like it's in the tea leaves, man. It's awful.
if the problem is the number of tea leaves you've got to read in order to falsify all the wishful thinking of all the other factions and all the metaphysics of all the cultures, you have to be able to do enough comparative civilization to see through that and see the underlying pattern, which just turns out to be, unfortunately, fairly simple. Okay. Need to find enough security to produce enough food to feed enough people, to be able to afford enough experts, in other words, specialists, for a long enough time over enough trade to produce enough wealth to be able to invent technologies, right? And then the odd one is, at some point, labor has to become scarce enough that you invent the most important technologies, which is why nobody invented them other than, there's no reason the Romans didn't, other than slave labor was so free, right? But you get into England and it's like, well, we can't have slavery and we can't enslave our own. We're running out of men. So what happens is we need machines. And so we got machines. Well, the recipe is the same for everyone, but everyone hits a different stumbling block along that sequence.
Right.
And like you and I have discussed a lot of times, Europeans, because they're pirates, right? We started out as pirates, right? We developed democracy because it's the only governing system possible for pirates and raiders. You can't have it any other way.
They won't tolerate
They
it.
won't tolerate anything else. So there's no, and raiders are mobile, so you can't build it on the capital structures that the ancient civilizations did. So and the problem is raiders, because they aren't static, because they're in mode, they can't develop the primary instruments, the technologies themselves, like bronze and whatever. They have to be invented by places who've already made the first mistake, which is it's already an irony, and so you would only get the pirate raider, democratic, aristocratic metaphysics from people who were not first movers. So it's so obvious that in retrospect, it's just
silly talk.
It's just silly, it's like, so I just look at it and, okay, well, this is relatively obvious. So but it's not. So any historian would look at the events we're living in, which is how you started out, and say, well, fucking of course, right? The only interesting thing is which pachinko ball goes into which hole first, right? I mean, you have no idea,
Can't
right?
tell.
I mean, who would have thought Trump would have won? Who would have thought the Russians would choose this moment in time? Crypto was deterministic, right? This crashing thing that's going on, this, right? The movement, the demographic collapse was obvious. Technological moderation worldwide was obvious, right? The regional restoration. I mean, the regional restoration of central states, core states of every civilization and civilizations is using different group strategies, given that every civilization represents a race, and that every race has a different demographic. I mean, these things are all obvious, right? But you can't.
The thing that's kind of got me is that it appears to be increasingly obvious that there's a faction attempting to actively destroy Western civilization.
Of course.
I know, but it's like it's becoming the long knives are out, man. It's like it's obvious what's happening, and they're tantamount to admitting it. As Chuck Schumer specifically stated, he wants amnesty for 11 million illegal immigrant invaders because the local population is not reproducing sufficiently. And I'm like,
You did that. You made that happen. You provided the disincentives to reproduce. No, not
oh,
you.
I'm like,
You and yours did
that would
that.
hurt. That was too
Sorry.
close.
No, sorry. I mean, you do the same thing to me once in a while. You say you, and I'm like,
No,
wait a minute. Are you talking about
talked-
me, or are you talking about someone else you're talking about?
I talked to the judge, and every time I say that to him, he always corrects me. Because he says, you don't talk to the judge like that, ever. It's too informal.
Sometime I'd like to talk to him, because I bet I could learn a lot.
He's a very interesting character.
Because the problem with judges is that unless you're already in their familial group, right, or in their tribe, you really can't have discussions with them about anything, because their professional neutrality is. But when it's a friend, it's if it's your friend, I can ask his interesting questions and
Right.
and try to get into the mind of, because he sounds like he has the same mind, right? And it's the same.
So it goes to this: it's all, every historian has predicted the same outcome, and the only question is, how does the thing reformulate itself for the next turning, right? And it's like the power players are trying to position it so they can maintain control of the civilization that is going through this, which is Western civilization.
Yeah, but I mean, it's true. We don't have a monarchy or a church anymore that can step in and say, "I've had enough." Right. And so our system of government, without the monarchy and the church, which is the monarchy and the aristocracy and the nobility, you can't get that from here, because there's no one to coalesce around. So
Right.
So I mean, there's no one to stop a means of undermining when we're essentially a military, right? And if you're a military and you have no general, right, whether it's the church on a moral basis or the states on a political basis, you're kind of screwed. So we have lost and realize that was their goal, right? They tried to destroy the church and they tried to destroy the monarchies, right?
They did pretty good at both.
Right, and then they went after the rule of law, and they try to create positive law because they want to be authority in charge, and they hate us, right? It's very clear. If you look you look at the ADL, you look at Glenn Greenblatt today, you look at who's the guy you just brought up, Chuck Schumer. They hate us. They don't say they hate us, but they do everything. Hate us, and because they believe we're evil, because we mirror the laws of nature. It probably is annoying that we are superior and they don't. They claim they are, right? And that's probably
One can only imagine.
You know, that probably annoys the shit out of them. But we're superior, we should be in charge. We proved that. Well, I mean, the fact that you specialize in organized crime is gonna make you more profitable, right? Right, than people who specialize in the production of commons. I mean, that's gonna, but you can't build a civilization, and we can. And it's because but so all we have to do is go out and suppress their method of organized crime, and then it's over for them.
It was an interesting function that I was pondering this morning related to the organization of the military, which used to be more geographically based.
Mhm.
Now, for instance, the USS Arizona, I believe, was manned by the state. I don't know if that's a fact, but
It just was normal that the regimental system pulls local, right? So you
Right.
pull local, and the reason is they want you to be loyal to each other.
right. But I
Uh,
don't think they do that anymore. It's like
no,
at the national level, at least I'm certain they don't. But on the National Guard level, I'm certain they do. But it destroys the natural leadership of the military in a political sense.
well, it was part of their design, right? You want to make a federal centralized power, and so you did that, right? And then before that, you had the state militia. So my grandfather was here in Connecticut, and he managed Washington. He led Washington's left in 1775. So, but that's because he was a landowner, right, and a political figure.
Right.
Not that he was very good at it, but I'm not taking any. I'm not making any great claims.
It goes like this. He was certainly sufficient, sir.
He was sufficient, but not. But I mean, the problem Washington had is that the militias weren't disciplined enough to fight that kind of war. So he wanted to keep people trained, and so that's where part of where well-organized militia comes from, is that the militias were too unsuccessful in the Revolutionary War, and so we need to have men have to be trained. In other words, what we think of today is men should go through universal basic training and be assigned to something equivalent to the guard, basically for life, like they do in Switzerland. And then you can respond to all sorts of things like, floods and storms and that kind of stuff, and you can hold the whole meal population. But I liked in my friends in Switzerland were like, no, because I can't do the German. The Swiss German has a particular accent, and I can't do it. But I talk to my friends, and they all look like you, right? They all look very thin. Why? Because they got to stay fit enough to do their service. And so he's like, no, I have to go. I have to stay fit, otherwise, when I do my, because they have to go and do it a couple of weeks or a month or whatever it is. They've changed it recently, but that's what you want. You want your males to have to stay fit to be able to have to handle emergencies, and you'd like it, of course, if your women knew how to handle hospitality or hospital functions or
right.
And so that you're not dependent. Like we have this thing, this big illusion that the federal government can respond to crisis, but nobody works for those things except a few bureaucrats. So what do you see really, especially down south where you have a macho tradition, right? All of a sudden there's some flood down there, some hurricane, and all the rednecks in their boats and their trucks and their construction equipment are out there. We're saving people, and the truth is, what you need for emergency services to create that very investment in the commons, right? Because you could be responsible for fixing that commons, because you want all the men basically in this to be available, and you need to know what resources they have. So if you've got, say, like even something as simple as a 4x4. To know that John had this many guys have 4x4s, this many guys have this many boats, this many guys have canoes, right?
Right.
Just to be able to put together, this guy's got access to 15 dump trucks, right? And this guy's got access to 6
Right.
plows.
To
right?
organize all that logistically is the
Right,
key.
and to simply say, to talk to the guy and say, get them together 4 times a year, for this is what we understand everybody's got. This makes sense. These are the crises we know about that might happen. Here's our plans for them, a general staff. Now everybody's enfranchised,
Right.
where you have a civic obligation, but see, they don't want the enemy undid all that. They undid all that impossible. And the thing that bothered me was the women in men's military schools, which I thought was the worst.
No, it was like this was the death knell. It was like the VMI,
Yep.
one of the last ones that gave it, and it's like, oh my, that was the bell toll right there.
Because you can't produce that kind of loyalty with women around. You just can't do it. You can't. Women are women. One woman makes you add one woman to a group of men, it makes it a society. And the minute you have a society, you don't have an army.
Right. It's not. Ceases to be malicial.
Right. Because that's all it was about the comments. Anyway, so your original, how did you start this out? Because I wanted to get back to that.
We started by the inevitability of the decomposition of the liberal settlement that occurred after the Second World War.
Right. I mean, and the argument today for many knowledgeable intellectual is that when the Soviet Union fell, we just didn't reorganize it. Right. And we enjoyed our 90s.
That
right?
was a terrible lost opportunity.
Right. And we got rid of the only president that was competent, which was the first Bush. We got rid of our most competent president in international affairs. The guy had run the CIA and and he'd been president, the whole thing, right? This is a guy who actually knew what the fuck to do. And we replaced him. Which is just, just stupid. We do, and then we did one worse president after another, right? So, Clinton, Obama.
Oh my! It is like
Bush may not have been good, but he wasn't bad. In other words, he was too dedicated to the he was too obsessed with the 9/11 event and eradicating that. And so
the
this
younger Bush.
Yes. And so this became a bit of a problem in that he took his eye off the rest of it.
I don't think he was even competent enough to be making any decisions, to be honest with you. I think that he was mastered by somebody else.
Well, he had one of the strongest cabinets we've ever had. So, if that's the case, that's fine.
But I regard the whole thing as just rife with corruption for way too long.
You mean the government?
The presidency, yeah, the government has just been far too corrupt for far too long.
It's for the reasons I argue, and Hoppe really screwed me up with this. But you need a monarchy. You got to have one. You got to have one because otherwise, if you have a monarchy, you have a nation, a gene pool, right? And you have an extended family, with the head of the family, and that group has the longest durable interest of any faction. Whereas the problem is, without that person and without rule of law, you have ideology, theology, fashion. You have every other kind of nonsense come up.
Well, it's like if we tie this back a little bit even further, is that the elimination of the monarchy was necessary to eliminate the nation, to damage the nation's capacity for sustenance, to sustain itself, because you destroyed the head of the family the family will dissolve.
Correct. Well, I mean, that's again why the Jewish movement to destroy the aristocracy was so important to them and so directly stated. And because it's so important, once you lose the monarchy you lose the nation, right? Which is important. You lose the family, and their strategy doesn't tolerate that because the monarchy is happy to throw them out. So
It's essential for the destruction of the monarchy for the purpose of substituting the
clerisy,
multinational
yes,
pagan empire run by the clerisy
yes,
for the nation state run by the people.
correct. I mean, yes, I don't want to try to refine that any. I'm just thinking of objections that someone might say, but I'm like, there's no meaningful objection to the movement. So when I look at this, when I was thinking about what we were going to talk this morning while my house was being emptied of smoke, at least it was olive oil smoke. Well, I was thinking, well, this is an interesting time. And of course, I see the interesting hyper reaction against Musk on Twitter, which is fascinating, as evidence of the enemy.
Yes.
And their technique, and how terrified they are that we can have truthful reciprocal discourses,
Free speech,
because that subjects their false promises to falsification. So I think that's fascinating. And so I think the war is fascinating. I think the world economy is fascinating. I think the end of the false promise is fascinating. In other words, the end of the liberal order. In other words, the false promise of liberalism. In other words, it's becoming unbelievable. In other words, their belief of globalism, to us it was never believable, but it's becoming difficult to false promise.
They were attempting to project it through the unipolar world.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like this is really Mr. Trump was reinstated on Twitter yesterday. And the question is whether or not Mr. Trump has announced he's going to run for election. And he's the nearest figure to leader of the remnant nation of the United States that was formerly represented by the United States.
Yeah, and my attitude is, if they go after him hard enough, then they'll push him into the corner that the hard right wants them to push him into. At which point he just proves that if he wanted an insurrection in January, he could have had one. I'm intimately involved in these matters at the time, and it's just like, if he wants one, he can have one. He knows it.
Yes.
At least 5 or 6 million of us would have showed up. So I didn't go there. I mean, here's my self-blame. I was ready to go there and make that speech that needed to be made, and because of who was running it, I'm like, it's going to be a clusterfuck. And in the end, it didn't matter that it was going to be a clusterfuck because they ran it. What mattered is nobody went up on the podium and read a set of demands, which converted it from an attempt of something you could make aspersions about into something that was concretely demanded. I've still got that speech somewhere, but it's just only 3 minutes long. But it's basically about restoring the freedom of speech.
Yes.
Because we don't have the freedom of speech, we can't resolve this, and then we're left with war. And while some of us would enjoy war, it's not good for any of us. In other words, we
Right.
might enjoy it, but it wouldn't be good for us. And so let's invade war. And so we're demanding this action before Congress be passed. Right. Then at that point, then the discussion is about what was demanded. Right. It's not about whatever the left
False
can
claim, just lies, just
lies
lies.
they can make up. Now,
Right.
what the guys who went there on January, they thought they were defending the republic.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if group A believes the election is legit and group B doesn't. When the group B says, I want an investigation. Well, I mean, the moral thing for the court to do is say, if this is a suit before the court,
Right.
then we need to have an investigation and everything's frozen until we have an investigation. Well, the investigation would have turned up what it did, which is if there was, we can't, it's not easy enough, very easy to find. And so the court would be stuck in the position to be today, which is you have to let it go. Okay, fine. But then you would have left this division in the people who because the court didn't do that, or because the Congress didn't do that, because the Congress was equally able to do it.
That's right.
You wouldn't have the people today say, okay, our voice wasn't heard. We double down on what we think is a moral offense. And the other side doubles down on their own nonsense. They're both nonsense, of course, because these are matters of belief, not fact.
That's right. That's right. There's unsettled factual.
Right. And so what was the argument I always make is it's what the common law says and concurrent democracy says. What's the point? Is you have to produce some sort of consensus in order to produce some sort of legitimacy. Now that consensus comes out of the court whenever it's a dispute. I mean, the Congress can try to can negotiate a dispute, and if it can't negotiate a dispute, the court can resolve a dispute. But when the court resolves a dispute, if everybody's been heard and it is what it is, then we don't have any reason to conflict, and you can punish people who continue the conflict. But by failing to do that, it's the same fucking game they played with the vaccine, which was they had no right to make the claims about the vaccine they did, and they had no right to force people into taking it or deprive them from their work because of it. But this is just more left-wing authority, Leninist power to make everybody perceive that we're all equal, even though what it really is a vast inequality of power by depriving people of their sovereignty over themselves. But the reality is, if it's a vaccine and it works, take the fucking thing. If it's a vaccine and the vaccine doesn't work, or you think it's harmful to you, don't take it. Well, I mean, we'll find out who was right. But you don't have the right to deprive me of my choice of sovereignty in a matter you can't warranty and guarantee. So it was a really easy, in other words, under the law, in other words, the common natural concurrent law, in other words, under decidability, under what we do, there was no reason for the court to have not say we need to hold hearings on this to determine whether there was a thing. And we have not, say you have 90 days. Right? There's nothing going to happen in 90 days, right?
That's right.
And we knew everything in 90 days. So you have 90 days to bring this before the court and make your case to the people. And then they said, okay, well, this is what we've decided. Now it's a matter for the legislature. It's turned over to the legislature. Great. And we would have solved this problem in a democratic manner. But they didn't solve it in a democratic manner. They solved it in an authoritarian manner. They didn't solve the vaccine in a democratic manner. They solved it in an authoritarian manner. We have the institutions available for producing concurrency and decidability. We have them. And so those institutions, they avoided the use of those institutions on purpose for purely political ends. In other words, to obtain power. Now, the thing is, the right was right. It doesn't matter.
Specify that, please.
The right was right to demand their sovereignty. In other words,
yes,
the choice. The right was, if I'm going to just assume, or I'm not making this argument, right? But for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that the election would, even if there was the corruption we assume, right, wasn't enough to tip the scales, and therefore Biden actually won. Right? I'm going to make that assumption, right? Even
If
so,
you will.
no, I'm saying for the sake of argument.
Yes.
Sake of the
I
argument. Okay. I'm waiting for you to tear me apart.
I'm keeping my mouth shut.
I'm just trying to
Why?
get the argument out without being. So for the sake of argument, all right, it doesn't matter because the people were told to believe, not to. They were when they have no trust. There's a believe or trust. We don't have any. Well,
We certainly don't trust the mouths that were speaking it.
so just produce the trust. So in the end, I'm going to say that the right was right to demand in either case, even if they weren't right about the facts. Right?
Yes.
When you don't trust anybody, and there's what I mean, it looked to me as, and I specialize in identifying lying by all the means by man. It looked to me like the voting was rigged, right? And I'm like, well, I mean, statistically speaking, this just can't happen. In other words, it can't happen unless there's some other thing
Something else happened that,
going on
that
here.
is not explained by the
Right,
numbers
but
don't add
well,
up.
it turns out that the way they did the vote harvesting and bringing the harvesting in, this is what created the anomaly, right? Most the anomaly, right? And so they had used the ruse of they successfully used the ruse of the epidemic, the ruse of to create the opportunity for vote harvesting, and then use vote harvesting to win the election. Okay, well, okay, but that's not saying that the votes were fraudulent, right? That's saying they manipulated the system, right? So, but in any event, the right had a reason had justifiable reason to believe the election had been stolen, because we know Democrats do this stuff all the time.
And to disbelieve those cunning leftists.
Well, of course. So since we have this right to believe, then the court should have made the decision. Well, they have a justifiable reason. And my problem with the court is that, and realize I had to think deeply about this, right? In other words, this wasn't something I just this is something I thought about for weeks.
Yes.
Is that the court's in the position of saying the government's illegitimate. The people consider our government illegitimate. The people are beginning to consider our military illegitimate. The only thing and so the problem the court has is we have to restore legitimacy, at least in the court, and we have to do it over time. In other words, we're going to do it by creating a pattern, not by issuing an edict. Right? And so that's what they're doing. That's what the Federalists, anyway, that's what the movement of conservatism through the court is attempting to do, as restore rule of law in order to restore the court's legitimacy, so the court can restore the state's legitimacy. Right. So okay, now you're the court and you've made this decision. All of a sudden you're presented with, okay, now we can really fuck that up. All right. So it was a matter of timing for the court. It's like, God damn it, if we get involved in this right now we've just, whereas if they had restored legitimacy already, right, they've done what they had with abortion and the other shit there, the guns and whatever. They've restored legitimacy to the constitutionality. They've restored the demand for concurrency, consensus in the war, and for the prohibition on judicial activism of circumventing the legislature and the people by the courts. Because they've done that. Then they could say, well, in the context, they could have made the decision of this is an undecidable proposition. There's reason for just doubt. We need 90 days to ask the parties how long it's going to take. They would have said 9. They might have said less. Right? We probably could have solved it in 60 days if you'd thrown enough people at it. It's the same thing with lawyers, for example. I brought up the militia, but same thing for lawyers. We don't use our lawyers like that, like an army. When crises happen, there's no reason when you're vote counting that we don't fill the fucking. I mean, got one lawyer for every 300 goddamn people. There's no reason it isn't run by lawyers who, if they get caught, lose their livelihood. right? So, you know, that's another malicial activity. Voting should be sacred and under the auspices of the sacredness of the court. And so I don't care if I have left, because if you look at lawyers, you know, they're going to protect their pocketbook before anything else. Now I live in a little fucking farm town, all right? So it's little old ladies, and I mean, I actually know the people that are at the desk when I go to vote,
Right.
Because I live in a town with like 8,000 people in it, maybe less, 7,000 people in it, right? Right, it's a village, glorified village, right? So, you know, they're people I know. And who are they? They're like ordinary, they're like lower working class folk, right? It's their, you know, it's their socialization, right? There's something, these little old ladies aren't engaged in any corruption, but they're not part of a big city political machine. So we could pull the lawyers in. Anyway, I meant to bring up the lawyers as a militia track and then go back to the central point, which was that the court was in a bad position because it didn't want to interfere in its, and so I understand why the court made the decision. But the point is, the broader point I'm trying to make is we have the institutions necessary to do what was needed to be done, and there was no reason that we couldn't have had, well, status quo for 90 days till we figure it out.
All right.
This
So,
is-
so it looks like, I'm circling back to, the fact of Mr. Trump running is becoming a conversation piece. And there are people who are like, they're dead set against this because they regard him as divisive of the Republicans, the right.
You know, that does depends on where you are. That might be a
Well,
good thing.
Right. I think that among the Republicans, he may be the only one, with the exception of Mr. DeSantis, that can rally the right.
I think
But-
it's important that Trump's followers are devoted,
Yes.
right? That they will. I mean, he can fill his fucking auditoriums. I mean, when he talks,
Oh,
I
yeah.
love, I
Oh,
love the fucking guy when he talks because I understand what's going on. And I think it's genius. I mean, the people who don't understand, he's a fucking genius at what he does are idiots. Now, if you say DeSantis is a better politician, I would just agree with that.
I wouldn't argue. And but the issue is that it appears that Mr. Trump is exhausting the opportunities for peaceful resolution of this discourse.
Well, that's what we're hoping, right? I agree with you. And so what I was going to say before that sentence you just said was that it depends on where the Overton window is just prior to that election. And so what I expect to see is they're going to amp up BLM and Antifa type stuff again in response. I suspect that will happen.
To drive the polarization.
Or drive polarization. And but I'm not sure they can get away with it a second time because now everybody knows, right?
That's right.
So I think that we need to do is they need to focus on the prosecution of Antifa BLM.
Wait, say that louder, please.
They need to work on the prosecution of and they need to make a January 6th equivalent of Antifa BLM, and they need to work it up the chain because there's so much money involved there, and there's a lot of players involved, a lot of money.
Well, it's like this thing
And that matches with the Clinton and whatever FBI portfolio, you know. So these things are related to each other, and it's the same actors behind it. So why not let Congress spend the next 2 years on that issue? So here I'm getting it back to it because you're right. He is exhausted. He is exhausting the opportunity for reconciliation. And the difference is he's going to hold, of course, but he could just say that's enough. And there are a bunch of us who would really much like him to say that because then we could just get it over with. So I think it's there are some windows, some cycles and windows going on.
Yeah.
And you know, I can tell you that I can see them just like you can, right? You're anticipating these inflection points, and I can't figure out the timing. I'm not very.
No, I don't think anybody can.
So, but it feels about right to me. That we're gonna come to some sort of head here. Around the next election.
Wow. Just so, but I have to tie this back because it's like the same forces that are work, the BLM, Antifa. It goes to this Ukraine war, FTX funding schemes, which are, I mean, I was studying it a little bit before while you were clearing the smoke out of your house. And that you did a good job, by the way. The details are coming out, and it's like and you talked about it yesterday, which is the rapidity of the transmission of information of these events.
Yes.
However, they attempt to retard that. It's incredibly fast.
I would say if the nerds get a hold of it, it's all over.
Right? That would be the geeks. What do you call them?
I call them geeks. Aspies, the autistics. If you get those, because it's just one of the miracles of the internet, is that you're solving murders, you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff, just because the geeks have something interesting to work on.
Just give them something to chew on.
And it's all for status and joy, right? They don't want anything other than to exercise. They want to play. They want to play a game, it's a competition. But I mean, you get these guys that are just like they're off on. I mean, it still amazes me. Look at the quality of the military intel being produced by military bloggers. In other words, but the fact that we've got phones and military bloggers, some of these people, they're outdoing, they're doing as well or better than the government, the military's own intelligence people, right? Because they're fucking everywhere. I mean, every person with one of these goddamn things, why aren't you in focus?
It's ignoring it. It's kind of interesting.
Everybody's got one of those things, is an intelligence operative. And so the Ukrainian military has to tell people not to post stuff on social media because it's so effective. But I mean, you know how they determine whether a tank is actually destroyed or not, is if they get a citizen with a fucking camera of it. That's how they know, right? Because they and so if they hear something's been destroyed, right? Somebody reports that they took out a tank, they don't count it unless. So I mean, you just kind of think of how that's happening. Well, the same thing happens with nerds, right? Right. I mean, the nerds love this shit. So I mean, the thing you're talking about is that there needs to be enough data transparency for nerds to get to work.
Let the nerds have the data so they can chew it up and give us the answer.
So in the case of the Ukraine, right, on the message, I understand Ukrainian corruption. I understand it. I mean, I've been there. I've participated in it.
Okay.
One of my jobs was to observe it, and so I've observed how it is done. It's if I go to meet with your campaign, and I've done this, right, because I've worked on campaigns. But I go to meet with your campaign. There's this coded language, but what's really going on? How do we get? Are you going to be able to give money to the campaign? I mean, I've been in the room where they say, well, I represent, what was his name? Lukashenko or what the name is. I'm going to say the wrong one.
Doesn't matter.
Lukashenko, Poroshenko. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I've been there. I work. They have business cards. I work for the president. What does that really mean?
That means I have influence.
And it means I handle graft.
Oh, I'm supposed to handle the funds.
Right, I handle graft. And so, so when you want to make a deal with Ukraine, you want to bring a European business in Ukraine or something else, you talk to one of these fixers, and they arrange all this stuff for you for a fee. These fees are $10,000, $50,000, $200,000, right? He gets a taste, but it's. So what's the difference between what we do and what they do?
Wait. Well, this is not what I'm trying to go to.
Well,
I'm trying to get to this,
Oh,
which is
I
this.
know you are. I'm sorry. Am I taking too long to get there? So what's the
No.
difference? Okay. So the answer is, the thing is in Ukraine, it's this, what we consider corruption, they consider just how it's done.
We understand it one another on this subject matter, but the issue is this is our government is sending billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars over there, and then recycling it back to the Democrat Party, who happens to be running my country right now.
Correct. The thing is, we need to know how much, the fact that any is happening is bad.
Okay.
Right?
I'd say that it qualifies as bad.
Right. Any of it, $1 of it's bad. Right. I just want to know, is this like normal, I give $1 million to these key people to buy their influence, to know that, because they help fund something. In other words, the Democrats are definitely funding, they're more desirous of funding Ukraine than the Republicans are, or at least at least one wing of the Republicans are. So is that what's going on, or is there something else going on we don't know about? In other words, there's three. In other words, it shouldn't be happening, but if it is it normal political campaign financing, corruption, or is there something else going on
It
here?
looks to me to be extraordinary, sir.
Well, that's what I want to know, right? And so
How would you determine such a thing?
well, you find out.
Because it's like, well, let's just say it this way. It's the diversion of taxpayer funds to directly support the established political
Yeah, but
power
that's not,
unit
that
that's in
happens
charge.
all day, every day, everywhere in our country, right? I want to know.
Not in front of my face.
Yeah, it does.
It's like right under my nose. Really? It's like usually they have the decency to at least just kind of
No,
keep it
the whole thing
like
that's
an India
interesting
cult.
to me is using crypto to launder it. It's just so Ukrainian. It's just so using Ukrainian. There's it, because you understand how big crypto is there,
Okay.
right? And so to me, I don't know. This is one of those things where I'm not that offended because I think it's absurd, but I know that the corruption works there. But the idea that they would use crypto as
Yeah.
a means of laundering the money so they could get it into the Democratic Party's hands is just fucking hysterical to me, right? It's just so Ukrainian.
But what was funny that I'm studying the character, the chief character that you would never give any money to, much less the time of day, probably.
Mhm.
That fellow, his mom was an operative for raising funds for the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
It's like the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, except it fell into Ukraine.
So the thing I want to see is here's the interesting thing. What's the difference in corruption between the Republican and Democratic parties? We know the answer. Is that Republican corruption, all right, is usually on a scale of go ahead.
Oh, I'm listening.
It's usually something to do with the military industrial complex, or
It's piking.
right. Well, I mean,
Just
okay,
weak compared to what the Dems are doing,
well,
man.
I mean, that's the point. Is
It's
that
just amazing scale.
if we go through the two parties' means of corruption, the left is basically a criminal organization. I mean, the Democratic Party is a criminal organization. The Republicans are frequently stupid, which is what I blame most conservatives for. But the Democrats are evil, and and the problem. It's like this thing is. Elon asked this question: "Is what are the next features?
What are the next what?
What are the features we need?" Well, the features we need are the news cycle thing I talked about the other day,
Yes,
and a rating of journalists in other words,
that's right.
for their whether they engage in these types of deceits and whatever. Which would, if he did that, it would clean up the news industry in under 3 years.
So journalist ratings.
Right, when it's, how many times do they, in other words, what stories turn out, what stories are claimed to be true or suggested to be true, but turn out to be false? What is the sequence of accusational methods, because that's how the left does it, that are increasingly false but never corrected? And which journalists don't make the false accusation? Which journalists correct their false accusation? In other words, the reason this happens is the public forgets the
Yes.
storylines. And so what my point is that we
Digitize it.
What?
Digitize it.
Right, we
Don't
want
forget
to we want to make a record of the claims. Now there are only so many, and there's only so many per country, because that's what you need to have it be, right, by country.
Well, you're giving a good thing for the artists to do.
Well, I'm saying is that if you want to clean up journalism, it's two things. It's long form, in other words, make it so you can make a rebuttal, right? And second thing is create a map of the narratives by area. And what you'll get out of the map of the narratives by area, you'll get the data for the AI to invalidate false claims eventually. It'll happen pretty quickly, actually.
This is a great project.
Well, I would think it would be, if you want to produce truth.
Speech.
See, the thing is that the Republicans can't say the truth under democracy because it's offensive, and the Democrats lie. Right.
Okay.
So these are different things. These are different problems, right?
These are different problems.
Right. And so, so we can catch both sides. All right. The difference is if you catch a Republican, he's not saying, what they're saying is true. It's just unpalatable. So they're avoiding telling you the uncomfortable truth, whereas Democrats are lying to obscure the uncomfortable truth. And this is just how both sides work. And I've worked on masculine and feminine cognition long enough now that I just see it as, well, what the fuck do you expect? You expect masculine and feminine differences in deception.
I think the project for cleaning up journalism is that is a very important project.
And we know it can be done because there are a couple groups that already do this news cycle, the track news cycle. So when a thing becomes, it's even easier on Twitter, because when something stays in the news long enough, you start to have enough durability. And so when something stays a topic long enough, you have it. But some topics go away and come back. So you have themes, and you have themes. Basically you have masculine, feminine. You have themes, and then you have movements. In other words, movements. I'm thinking of music. Movements, and a movement is basically what we consider a narrative that lives and dies during the news cycle. And so, if you look at those narratives, those movements, that's pretty easy thing to graph.
Right. I am very interested in this project. That's a good project.
Well, here's the truth. I wrote about this in 2009.
Okay.
And I developed an iconography and a means of measuring those things. In other words, I measured what kind of arguments they were making. And so I've looked at this problem since 2009, so 19, 13 years. I understand this problem pretty carefully. It's where I got the methods of argument.
Your job is crazy, man. Because it's like, it's this far beyond thinking. It's beyond thinking, because it's thinking about things.
Yes.
It's all you do. And it's like that is a fascinating specialization, sir. It's utterly fascinating because and it goes to your autistic nature, which is just make your mind chew on some interesting project.
Yeah, it's my way of preventing insanity is to work on a hard problem.
Seems to have worked pretty well.
No, but I mean, it really, I started out with, I was aware of the ternary logic, and I was aware of methods of argument. But the problem is, methods of argument are framed in the positiva. So I said, okay, well then, those are? And so I started out with, well, these are pseudoscientific arguments, right? And I said, then I got to, well, there's only three classes of fictionalisms, which I don't want to repeat again, right? And then I get, okay, well, now what's the difference between, oh shit, now I got to bring in GSSRM. That's when I came up with GSSRM, right? I'm like, okay, now this is sex differences argument, boom, right? And it wasn't until so you can see how I worked through this thing to produce the grammars. It wasn't until you and I working on this together that I was healthy enough again that I sort of got to the point where we can just graph this as one long fucking stream, right? And it's really obvious that it's just sex differences in cognition all the way across, and that's horrifying.
Why?
What?
Well, you say it's horrifying. I want to know why it's horrifying.
It's humiliating. It's like we're these humans and we're so fucking proud. And we think we're the center of the universe and God loves us and all this other shit. And it turns out that
That's a mistake.
we're an accidental error. We're the byproduct of an error in calculation. Solar planets, for that matter.
Too much pressure somewhere squirted us out.
Like the anal leakage of the universe.
Oh my.
Oh, sorry. And so it's so humiliating, right? Because we think we're so important, and then you get into it and we're actually kind of clownish in our own way. And we make fun of like dogs and their stupid shit, or cats and their stupid shit, or children and their stupid shit. You realize that we still do all this stupid shit, and it's just.
That's right. That's right. And it's about that. Don't take it too seriously, anybody, right? We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously.
Well, I mean, the flip side is it's beautiful what we accomplished despite our stupidity.
Well, I was having a chat with a nice Christian lady, and it was kind of interesting because I ran into her her superstition is what I'm going to call it, which is like this. It's like the basic premise is this. It's like this is like the end times, right? But the presumption in her mind appears to have been that in the end times things just end. It's like, no, that doesn't end. It's the cycle ends and life goes on, right? And it's like, I had to tell her it's going to be okay, but keep the women and children inside because it might get nasty outside.
Yeah.
That's all. And it's okay. It's because the men are going to be setting things straight somehow. And that's what's being called for. How about that?
Back in the day.
What's that?
Well, I was back in the day. I was trying to make the point of, because I learned this, of course, in Ukraine, is fire is really an army, right? And all you really have to do is light shit on fire, and that's it, right? You overwhelm the ability to light shit on fire relatively rapidly. In other words, to cure it, and you can't put it out as fast as you can start it.
That's right.
And you don't have to sit there and absorb bullets to while it's going on. I mean, it's really that's what I see. I see house to house. This is what I want to avoid. I want to avoid house to house, shit on fire, running out of food. Because what would I like to see? I'd like to see a March set of demands issued to Congress, as like we did in the revolution, the American Revolution, which wasn't really a revolution. It was just a secession movement. And so I think we should have another secession movement by the same exact means, because the Declaration, the Constitution, the law allow for it. Where they tried to outlaw it, but it's not going to happen. Right? They tried to put some laws in there to make insurrection, but it can't be insurrection if it's restoration. Whether it's corruption. You can't assume the government is right. The government doesn't have the right to assume it's right. So
The people have a right to contend it.
yeah, I
They
mean,
should choose
and it
to
says it
try.
right there whenever all these truths to be self-evident, right? And then there's times it comes a time when people have are subject to enough crimes by their government. And we've certainly been subject to enough crimes by the government. Even
Wait,
those,
wait, it would be like this. Are there any in the audience who would have contentions that we have not yet been subjected to enough crime and rapaciousness by our government?
Well, I
Because
mean-
we can entertain it in the comments below.
well, I mean, culture-side genocide, no, culture-side, civilization-side, and genocide quite qualify as
Rude enough.
rooted good enough. So anyway, shit, where was I was going somewhere with that. No, lost it.
I
So
think-
so fire, whatever. So
Yes.
I want to avoid that. I mean, the Eli contingent wants the skull pyramids, which I'm, emotionally all behind, but intellectually, I just want to have another secession movement. And in
Oh, I
that
believe
sense,
it will work.
huh?
I believe that will work.
Which in this case is just merely a restoration of the Constitution to original form. And mine, in addition, the 8 holes I think it's 9 holes now because I found another one. 9 holes I found in the.
Attaboy. It's like this is and the generation of free states, free cities, like Kansas.
There's no reason. You need about we know from the evidence, you need about 300,000 people to make a state. No, or survivable entity. That's not many people. Jesus.
Kurt, did you burn something in here?
Yeah,
Okay, so if you open the door to the hallway, there's a chance that you'll empty the whole building. The smoke detector will.
well, how do I do it? Sorry, boss.
Open the door to your,
I did.
okay, you can't do that.
Okay, boss. I
Everybody will be outside.
know. Well, I thought I'd set this one off and send everybody off. I was telling Brad here that on my call that I was afraid. So anyway, I got you, boss. I didn't know.
Yeah, no, we've done that. Somebody's burned their steak on the broiler.
Yeah.
Open the door in the hallway, filled up, the smoke detector, and fire department's here.
So what happens if this one goes off?
Nothing. Well, this one here won't go up. That's not a smoke detector. That's a strobe light and a horn.
Oh, I thought that's
Okay,
what
that's
this.
not a sensor.
Okay,
You have,
2.
yeah, that's not a sensor.
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to open your window.
I did.
Okay.
I turned the fan on, but I also opened the door, and you don't want me to open the
No,
door.
no.
Okay.
We have sensors all in the hallway, and then the fire department will be here. Nothing they do. They have to
Okay.
clear the building, and it's cold.
I just assumed that was gonna go off. That's
No,
all.
no, that is just, that will only go off if one of your hallway things goes off, that will go off.
Got it. Thank you for helping me understand.
Okay.
Love you, man. Thanks for all
Yeah,
you do.
You can't put the smoke in the hallway. so.
Okay, love you, brother. Thank you for telling me.
Well, that was poignant because it was like this. It goes like this. We wish to avoid fire. The
Yes.
appearance of fire. Everybody is of the equivalent thought process.
We were in, you can, if you look at the Maidan Square, right? There's like this mall behind you. Then there's this big pole with a eagle type thing on top of it. And then there's the Main Street, right? And then there across the way, there's a big arch of these Stalin era buildings, right? That are really quite beautiful. We don't realize that underneath that is all shopping center, right? So it's all shopping underneath the ground because it's fucking cold there. Anyway.
Right.
So trying to think if I could insert something derogatory and mischievous in there, but I can't really. But it's actually quite a nice shopping center over there. And the same way, the shopping center also goes the other way up the street. So under the main street is also could have shop it. You'll hear that word for shopping, which is where all the hot girls are supposedly. Anywhere it's for the restaurants and whatever. And so you're underneath that. And so so if I'm looking at that curved building back there, over on the side is one building. It's big stone Stalin building. And we were down in the first floor of that building, and the guys are hammering out shields, those metal shields, right there in the right there at the door. And then just outside that, there's a ring of tires and all this other shit.
Yeah.
And they're making Molotov cocktails, and the runners are coming up and getting the Molotov cocktails. And then their homeless guys are cooking food, which I thought was fucking hysterical. They were having a blast, right? That, there's a lot of alcoholics in that part of the world. They aren't like here, but there are a lot of them. And then because they're taken care of by the church, so they all hang around the churches. And then what was happening is we're just lighting shit on fire. The thing is that you can't. It's like you can shoot a person, but what do you do with fire? You have to put it out. And so I learned that all you need is fire. You don't even need guns. You just need fire. And when you have that many people producing that much fire, I mean, if they just wanted the whole fucking town to burn, it would have been gone. Right? So they took out government buildings. The problem was, of course, at the end there, the government guys were up on the hill. They just started shooting the kids. We lost about 100 guys there. It's still pretty awful. But they're heroes. Anyway.
Sun Tzu talks about it.
Well, my point was, we have this vision of the Civil War. It's not going to be like that at all. It's not going to be North against South, right? It's going to be neighbor against neighbor, and certainly ruralite versus urbanite.
It reminds me of the Saxons' conquest of England.
Yes.
Which is like this. For the audience, Churchill wrote about it, and they used the what was called tableware as the weapon of choice, which is like, wow, we're just going to take the silverware and go get the neighbors and make them done. Wow.
I mean, you talk about a Saxon, but you know what a Bowie knife is, right?
Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah, the tableware is different than what we use currently.
Well, you know, it's funny because a Saxon is basically a Bowie knife without a curved tip, right? It's straight across and then the tip down like that, which is a very you can use it for all sorts of stuff. The same way you use a Bowie knife, you can use it as an axe if you want to.
Right.
And so they vary in size, but some of them are quite big. I mean, they're basically they're short swords.
Short swords, yeah.
So, but you see the guys, and they've got an axe, right? And they've got that. And if you want to see how that Mel Gibson in the War Against the British, what's that movie called?
The Patriot.
The Patriot. Watch how he fights with an axe. He calls it a tomahawk, but that's kind of silly because a tomahawk's a British boarding axe. Right, that's all it is, a boarding axe. Right, that's where they got them from, because there were so many boarding axes on so many vessels. So a boarding axe and a knife, and look how he fights that. That's actually how it's done. And it's not like order. It's a brawl with sharp things. Right?
That's right.
You don't want to say that fucking game, especially with farmers. If you didn't grow up around farmers, you don't understand what that means. But if you grow up around, they're like the farmer strong is not a meme. It's a thing.
That's right. That's right.
The big difference between weight strong and farmer strong. You don't want to fuck with farmer. It's like our special forces guys. They don't look like, a lot of them they can run, right? You get too big.
That's
and
right.
Now you got to need oxygen, water, and food to feed all that muscle. So farmer strong's a thing. I remember guys on the farm, and you could see all these muscles.
Yeah.
In their arms, and their skin was kind of leathery. Right? And this is the '60s, so we had guys and it's early 1960s, so for 65, we had guys that, you know, that had started, we're farming in the 20s and 30s. Right? So farming in the 20s and 30s. Anyway, okay, so we're getting up. Let's go back to, is Trump that guy? I don't know. I want him in the mix because it's a way more interesting conversation. If that possibility is out there. Right, I want to avoid that possibility. You and I have talked about this for years.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
A year and a half. My goal is to avoid the possibility of providing a solution so we don't have to. But my belief is that unless people believe that possibility is real, they won't choose the peaceful alternative. In other words, they have to believe the danger is real in order to choose to come to the table of compromise.
Yes. It's like the issue is the true full exhaustion of peaceful opportunities. And it appears that's what we're doing. Because we attempt to ballot at this midterm. And there are some questions about the election this time as well.
Well, we've lost faith in the government. Now, we know why that is, but
it's like, but we lost faith in the federal, but it's like now we're in Arizona. And I'll only speak for Arizona because I don't speak for other states because I'm in Arizona. Is that we appear to be losing faith in the state government here, because there appears to have been irregularities of sufficient nature to question the value.
I thought they worked pretty hard on messaging, but they weren't believable. In other words, I watched the Arizona message. In other words, there were people in the Arizona offices that were trying to explain why it was taking so long to count out. The problem is nobody will believe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just not believable. It's like there was just too many irregularities, and it's like the Secretary of State who was running for governor and won the governorship, according to the stories, she did not recuse herself from the control of the election, which was okay. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't lend itself towards credibility.
I'll go back to the fact that DeSantis has proven how you do run an election, and we're going to have that instituted, because it's one thing to have corruption pre-digital, but post-digital corruption is just way too tempting. And the ability to manufacture and farm ballots without any guarantee that the people are cognizant of what they're voting for. In other words, it's not, if I get you to sign off on a piece of paper that you can't testify you understand the terms of the vote as a conflict.
Right, that was not clear. Please repeat that.
Well, I mean, a vote is essentially under the same terms as a contract. You can't. There's a voter in this contract, so it's like, a vote is like a vote of anything else. It's that you're claiming you understand what you're doing, and so you're signing, you're voting that you understand what you're doing. Well, you can't claim that if you can't demonstrate it. Well, sometimes it would say, well, the disenfranchised, they may not understand everything, but they can understand if you talk to them in their language. Fine. But if you can't show up, and demonstrate competency to show up. You can't, and we don't know that by your demonstrated action, you made that of your own volition. Then we don't know it. So I've come around to being against mail-in ballots, despite the fact that I've had to do it because I've lived overseas.
Right? Yes.
So,
that's the surprising turn in my consciousness as well, which is this: I believe that it should be all in person, and I don't care.
right, and
Like we talk about I saw images that were coming from Afghanistan back when we so long ago went there after 2001, which they put their finger in purple dye as an indication that they voted, so they don't do it twice.
yep.
And it's like, we should do that here, because I trust you.
Well, we need voter ID, we need that, and, you know, it's, because, I mean, the left is trying to create a race to the bottom, and there's always gonna be more people at the bottom. You can't even, I mean, we know we know pretty clearly that, you know, something on the order of at least a third of people can't be competent to vote. It's probably closer to half. Right?
Okay.
The lack of competency. So one of the things was great about property ownership was there was demonstrated competency.
Yes,
Because property back then meant farmland.
right.
So meant you were a small business person. You were at least independent. And so we need to go back to some qualifications. At least we need to go back to concurrency, so that the qualified and the unqualified votes can be measured separately, rather than the claim of the
Right. It just goes to your premise, which I think is an interesting one, which is the houses that are based upon your cognitive style or
your demonstrated competency by the responsibility you hold. Well, what's rank mean? It's the responsibility you hold. What's class mean? Class is the capital you manage, right? Which is what rank you hold in this society. So, I mean, now some of us manage different kinds of capital, right? And so, and that's useful, right? I mean, there's some of us manage financial, some of us manage industrial, some of us manage commercial, some of us manage craftsmanship, some of us manage workers, some of us manage families. Some of us are. When I say worker, your job is to transform the world into something else. But a managerial class, and I mean this in the shop level, not the executive level.
right.
Your job is to organize people to organize manipulation of the world. And above that, you have the clerical level, which is to measure things that we can calculate, so you can give people the instructions to do the transformation of the world. But I mean, these are just responsibility levels with degrees of abstraction and population. Right? So I'm a CEO and a capitalist. We all have different. We're dealing with larger, and a statesman are dealing with larger populations, with containing more and more different competing production cycles. So we just need people to vote by their competency, and concurrency would say, well, we don't need majority. We need majority minorities. And so it's not that we should I'm not saying we should ostracize the people who are the house of dependents, right? In other words, the people who are dependent versus the people who are independent, in other words, people who have responsibility other than themselves.
Right. They deserve a voice.
Well, they probably deserve a voice, but that doesn't mean that they even, no matter how large their number, that they should be able to create policy that's irreciprocal, which is what
It makes no sense to allow them to select how much everyone else is going to support them.
Right. On the other hand, if they want to raise an objection, I mean, my argument was the church did a better job than voting. The church did a better job of lobbying for their interests than the people have done lobbying their own interests. Right? It would be nice if we had that church again. I just don't, there's a couple of ways of constructing that, but I mean, then it kind of makes the church a lower class thing again. I don't think we can do that. So I think we need to have some way of organizing this so that houses so that we achieve concurrency. And, you know, I mean, the poor are always gonna want more than they've got. But, you know, the thing is that you construct trades. And you say, you can have this in exchange for this. Well, what will all those trades be? You can have resources in exchange for behavior.
That's
If you
right.
don't get behavior, you don't get resources. What today they do is they get resources without modifying their behavior. And that's the intention. Of course, what does the women want? They don't want the responsibility of forcing their children to adapt because or they don't want to put the energy into training them, etc. And they don't want the reliability of their actions of their children. But I understand that, right? So what? I don't want to go to war, right? You know, I don't want to get blown up into little bits and pieces. And you know, honestly, I don't want to pay for you and your rats, your rug rats, for the irresponsible rats either. So you know, I'm not going to pay for you. I won't, but I will give you resources. Is if you pay, or I will pay you if you will pay me. Which is pay me by training your rudgrats. And if you can't, then we institutionalize training, which is what we think of as religious school or military school, which is the two military orders. And you can tell it's probably equivalent to just manners. It's probably church, military, and manners, and it's probably middle class equivalent. We produce these schools that demand discipline out of you until you don't have to think about it anymore. You know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get it out of the. You're trying to make the impulse. Right. You know, if you're impulsive, we just need to train the impulse. We can train freaking horses and dogs and even cats, for Christ's sake, right? So I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, I could train a fucking bunny rabbit. His brain is like the size of a peanut, and so if you train a bunny rabbit, you can train a kid. So it's just how much energy goes into the training. Well, that's defensive it's defensive as well as offensive training, right? You put a kid in mindfulness school, right? Whether it be by the church, by the manners, or by the state, the graces of the state, the church, the graces of the state, however you want to put it, the military. You just train that into them. Okay, fine. Well, I've got them, and now I don't have to think anymore. I just react. That's fine, right? The problem is overcoming the fact that we're in a distribution, and some of y'all down there don't got too much going on upstairs, right? So we have to make it a habit. Well, you don't have to be very smart to have very good habits. You just have to be trained in them. I'm sure that's offensive to somebody.
If you are offended, do please leave a comment.
I mean, I'll beat up myself, right? I definitely am on the spectrum, and I had to go through a lot of discipline, torture, training, social anxiety.
Right? Oh my. Oh.
to learn how to be normal, right? I mean, so I'm not. I don't claim I didn't go through it. I mean, my impulses are different, but
that's right. But it still comes down to all of us to get this under control of the frontal cortex, which is suppressing all these impulses. Right?
Throwing a spear, shooting a bow and arrow, throwing a rock, and whatever. It's just fucking practice, right?
Right.
The limits of your ability to coordinate your physical motion, right? Well, it's the same thing with this shit. I mean, you look at the Asians, how they do it. I mean, they just get all the kids out in the yard and they make them do this stuff to chance or whatever until it's just autonomic. I mean, I remember we had to get in line or line up and walk down lines in school. Right? We had to walk these lines. I don't know when that stopped. It was probably junior high school or high school, but we had to walk down lines. And you don't think about it. You just get in a line. Right? It's just like how you do it. Well, I mean, what are table manners? If you have to think about your table manners, they're not going to work. And the whole point of having table manners is that you don't think about them because you've been disciplined into them so regularly. Me by getting poked in the hand by my father's fork every now and then.
I thought my dad was the only guy who did that.
Oh no, that's old-fashioned middle-class European discipline.
It works.
You sit up straight. You don't bend over to get your food. Your wrists never touch the table. your knife goes here when you put it down, your fork goes here and this way when you put it down, right? My mother had the full set of silverware, so like you got to learn what the 19
Lots
spoons
and
were,
lots of forks.
right? All this shit, how to pass stuff at the table, how to ask for it, how to say grace, all the crap, right? Manners, but that's just one. So like I remember going to I won't say who this, but going to a relative's house for their family. And how do you have such good manners? Like, because it's been beaten into me. But you forget how powerful those manners are. Like I got taught by my father really young. I don't know. I mean, I was kindergarten or younger. How to walk up to a man, shake my hand, introduce myself, look him in the eye, and do it hard, right? And go back. And I was like a little kid, right? But you know how powerful that was when you're a little kid? You can walk up to an adult, say, "Hi, I'm Master Truth Doolittle, or Bert Doolittle. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. And can I X, right? You do that to a shopkeeper, and they're like, "Where did you come from?"
Right.
Right? Well, you have instant credibility. So those things matter, right? Those kind of
That's right.
military discipline matters. Because they showed others, they're an advertisement for self-regulation. It's a symbol. It's actually a symbol of non-aggression.
That's right.
You can be trusted. Not only is it a symbol of non-aggression, but you can be trusted. Right. So what you're trying to do is manufacture those things, and you're trying to develop those habits. It's not fucking complicated. And I go back and I'm like, I understand why all this stuff is done, and all this discipline in the Anglo and Germanic families, Anglo-Dutch, Germanic. I understand where this comes from now, and it makes such perfect sense because you're trying to build trust. Right, in a world where everything is growing fast and anonymity is always a chance.
Challenge. Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
so you're having to create credibility, and the way you do that is imitating aristocracy. And what is the aristocracy imitating? Military discipline. Why? Because it's there to produce trust.
It's because it's essential. A lot of guys are going to get hurt.
And so it makes
Right.
perfect sense. So, and the church did the same thing, right? It developed the equivalent of military discipline in the church, which is kind of interesting. Weird how the Muslims did it, but the Catholic Church and the Muslim Church did an interesting job. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go up on that much of a.
That was good. That was good.
That much of a
Somebody
sentence.
will find it useful. Trust me. I don't have much else to talk about here. This is episode 2093 to my understanding. So do hit like and subscribe, everybody, and do leave the comments.
So what I want to, until I remember what I wanted to talk about. So we talked about Trump. We said that it's good to have him involved,
Yes.
if only for the reasons you stated, right? He'll exhaust, right? In other words, I always think bring a problem to a head, right? That's one of my, if you find a problem, bring it to a head. Right? Don't let it stew. I think he does that. I know DeSantis is a good governor. I don't really, I mean, he'd make a good president. That's not my, I don't think we have, I don't know if he can get elected. I don't know if any Republican can get elected anymore. But, so,
Not under the current election laws, I don't think.
so I don't think it's like I said, I don't think it matters who we talk about here as being the best candidate when I'm not sure anybody can get elected. Because the tipping point is passed, and with the number of single women we're producing who are into the crazy female cult, the effect to the left, I think that's not possible to overcome. I mean, the country's red, except for a couple of weird places at the far northwest and far northeast. The country's red. So, so from a white male perspective, that we're so outnumbered that we're outnumbered, and even with our white women defectors, it's enough with the number of immigrants we have, it's enough. So It's certainly clear that there's a huge concentrations in LA, New York. I mean, the immigrant cities, right? The immigrant cities are huge concentrations. New York, New Jersey, Boston, LA, San Francisco, Chicago. All these immigrant cities, the gateway cities, all these are heavily left wing because they've purged their middle class. They've got the immigrants in lower classes and the upper classes. So I just don't see how we win an election, so it don't matter. So what I care about is bringing the matter to a head, and Trump is the most likely candidate to bring matters to a head. Whereas I think even if DeSantis is a successful candidate, I don't believe he can win. And so Trump may not be able to win, but he can probably bring it to a head, especially if they keep pursuing him this way. Because he will back him into the corner where he just says, "Okay, I give up, show up." Right. So that's I would like to see that happen because that's our opportunity. What else? So I think we talked about that. That's probably fine. We talked about a little bit about how the court couldn't resolve this issue because resolve the issue of the election because of where it is and its restoration of its perception of the restoration of its legitimacy. But that doesn't mean the court couldn't have solved this problem. And I blame the court for punting, but it's understandable why they punted given their strategy for restoring rule of law. The problem is the court has to restore the law. This is going to include not only eliminating and reversing judicial activism, in other words, trying to circumvent the people in the legislature, but it's going to require throwing stuff back to the legislature. So that's the second step it would have to go through, which is saying, which is accepting, getting the lower courts to accept issues earlier, right? Or essentially just throwing stuff back to the. In other words, they'll have to openly state that we're throwing this back to the legislature because it's a circumvention of the legislature and the legislature's responsibility. But once they do that, and once they start naming that this was an illegal act, the court can then get the legislature to correct. But as a people, we need a monarchy, regardless of. I know how hard it is for Americans to hear that. Believe me, I completely get it. We need a monarchy, and I don't remember what else we covered before that.
It's a wide-ranging conversation.
Was the last
just the inevitability of it is the end of this cycle, the cycle being the fourth turning and the deterministic nature of it.
Okay, so the first topic we covered was that when a historian, what we're going through here is deterministic. What's not deterministic is the events that will make it visible and the timing of those events. You just can't fucking know, right? You can know there's going to be an economic correction. You can know there's going to be a geostrategic correction. You can know there's a global trade correction. You can know that there's going to be a response to demographic maladaptation. So you can know that there's going to be that the end of the liberalism, the liberal neoliberal project is there, and you can know that the end of the post-war consensus is there. Right? In other words, the attempt to create a universal trade system, but you can know all those things are collapsing. You can know that demographically we're being replaced, right? You can know all these things, but you can't know when it's gonna. You can sort of say, well, it's going to happen between 2020 and 2030, or maybe 2050 the outside, but most likely 2030. You know that, right? You could know that, but you can't say what triggers what. Like who could predict? Who could have predicted COVID would accelerate it? Who could have, or that they would use Antifa and the COVID together to undermine the president and the economy, which only accelerated things. How would you know? How could you predict that? Right? You can't, right? Because you can't predict those circumstances. But what you can do is say these things will exhaust their opportunities because all opportunities consist of differences. And the minute you get rid of a difference, that you lost the opportunity to be extracted from that difference.
Right.
So, okay, so we lost, so those are the topics we covered today in an hour and 41 minutes, 42 minutes. And I had something I want to talk to you about. It's not, I'm doing this narration, so I'm trying to think, what was it that I wanted to talk to you about?
And you cleared the smoke out of your house.
Yeah, and I got Gary to yell at me. He's so shy about correcting me that he overdoes it in order to not engage in conversation. I love you, man. I'm happy to do what's right. I didn't fucking know. I thought that thing said it
Oh,
all.
right. Mistakes were made.
Right? So I'm worried that I'm going to set that off, and a bunch of little old ladies are going to go out there, and it turns out that that's not going to happen. Right? That if I leave the door open, I'm going to set it off.
Oops. And I'm glad it didn't happen.
Anyway, no, it's just, if I have, don't you, you're not like, see, you're a get along, you'll get along with people, right? I mean, so it's for me, I'm not like these people, right? I'm not a member of the lower middle class, right? And so I'm like an alien. And so when they argue with me, I argue back, and they don't. It's like I'm always I just want to know what the rules are and I'll obey them.
That's right. I'm just trying to get along here.
I'm just trying to get along, but they're so used to people trying to play with rules that they don't realize that you could be ignorant of their frame of the world. Right? But I just don't see the world. So, anyways, and they do get that, but then they're nervous.
Yes.
Or the board will come talk to me, and I'm like, I love all you guys. I thank you for the work you do, whatever. But and I don't feel ashamed about not knowing. It's not a failure.
It's just mere ignorance.
It's just mere ignorance. Anyway, so
that bothers some people more than others.
Well, the problem is people can't tell the difference between when you're an asshole,
right,
and when you're just like, yeah. So I can list the number of things they've corrected me on, but I mean, this is one of those places where there's like 9,000 regulations, right? I mean, it's great for that reason. I mean, you can't walk down the hall in your socks. You have to wear shoes.
That's nice.
Right? I mean, there's just
simple.
It's just there's a million rules here, right? And you don't park at an angle in the parking lot. You park straight, right? I mean, right? Okay, but that's why it's nice. Right? And the people who don't want to obey all those rules, they leave.
And that's nice too.
And that's nice too. I like that. So, I mean, the more rules, the better. But just don't blame me for being stupid about,
just
there's 9,000 of them. Even if I read them all, I wouldn't remember, right? But they do. And it's owner managed. These guys are owners. They're not like, we all run this thing. I say we like I have anything to do with it. I give my proxy vote to them and say, do whatever you want, because I know they're going to do a better job than I do.
Right.
All right, so I'm trying to think of what that topic was. Let me see if I've got it here somewhere. Yeah, that's that. The other thing we hit on there. I know what it was. I'm afraid. Is it me or is a Jewish thing becoming really obvious? Is it just that I'm more aware of it becoming more?
It seems like it's becoming more to the surface in conversation.
Yes.
Like more public conversation. So I think it's becoming it's surfacing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want it to surface, turn into a discussion, and not have to turn into an action. But,
so there was the recent conversation that I noted was Paul Craig Roberts. he brought it up. He specifically mentioned the article that I was looking at was talking about the left is actively dismissing the First Amendment.
Mhm,
And he specifically mentioned the ADL
mhm.
as complicitous in this effort.
Yeah.
And it's like,
You know, by the way, I've known Paul for a long time. Not known. It's like I have a relationship with him. I met him a long time ago, and so I know of his.
Yep.
I've known him.
yeah,
And you can always count on him to say something that nobody else wants to hear.
he's a Sharpie, and
I don't always agree with him, but
what's that? It's not
I
necessary.
often don't agree with him because he has a chip on his shoulder. He has a chip on his shoulder for our old, very old things that happened in the 70s or 80s, right? He has a bit of so there's some things that have to do with the government that I recognize is the chip on his shoulder. There's
Okay,
something.
do explain that. That's
It's his view on monetary stuff. I don't want to go there.
okay.
I don't
That's
want to. I don't want to criticize the guy. Right?
No, I understand. I'm just trying to understand, and I appreciate that. That's okay.
So the point is that because I know him and I know of him, is that but it's fairly easy to the thing about him is because he's got that chip on his shoulder, he's comfortable saying the rest of the stuff. Does that make sense? So he got sort of punished or ostracized or blackballed, right? And so that just made him double down. And so when I look about his stuff on some of his economics, I'm like, well, that's just him being pissed off, right? On the other hand, that has given him the license to talk about all these other matters where he's right. I'm not necessarily even saying he's wrong about the stuff I was like he's got a chip on his shoulder about, right?
Right.
It's more that he kind of doubles down on it a little too hard. Is maybe the way I took it. It's like me saying I'm criticizing Hoppe, right? Or Rothbard or Mises or Hayek. Right? These are people that I have this much disagreement with, right? And the way you say, well, I'm a fanboy, but I'm not, I'm not dissuaded by I'm not persuaded by their errors, right?
Right.
Is that you mentioned their so he's another one. Well, I don't disagree with him on much, but this one thing I disagree on with him is very small. Well, that's the criticism. That's the near neighbor problem, right? It's very easy to criticize someone you don't really disagree with.
Which is that as I appreciate your. I say critique.
Yes.
Because it's like this, I appreciate it because it gives nuance to the readings.
But he's just got a chip on his shoulder. But that doesn't mean. But so those people are good, right? So he's out there, and you're like 3/4 of what he says. I'm like, yeah, that's fucking yeah. Of course, he's right because he knows his shit, right? It's not like he.
That's right.
It's not like he doesn't know what he's talking about. He absolutely positively does. I remember I was sitting in like the third row. And he was writing something up on the whiteboard or chalk. I think in my mind, it's a chalkboard. It was probably a whiteboard.
Right.
And he turns around and says, I know you're going to disagree with this. I'm like, of course I'm going to disagree with it. And I can't remember why I just said, that we're going to disagree with it. But, the answer is that, he's like saying, this is just my position. Right. He's not saying it's right or, he's just making a statement of his position. Of course, we know why. It's because he's got a chip on his shoulder about this stuff. And he used to come talk to Mises Institute now and then, so that's why I wanted to know him. So he's a great guy. I didn't mean to. I carried this on too long. I was just trying to make. I felt bad that I made this criticism of him, and I don't really want to. I just want to show that having a chip on your shoulder about one thing actually licenses you, gives you the moral conviction,
right,
to be openly discuss those things. Because what are they going to do to you? Once you've been
you've been put out to pasture.
Once you've been screwed, I mean, you might as well just say anything you want. And so that's how I view him.
Yeah. No, and I don't think it was too long. I think it was a good exposition because I think it will provide some utility to the audience to process information about people who you're near neighbors to.
Yeah, actually, that's something I want to criticize the right for all the time, is the difference between good and perfect. As they'll say, well, I disagree with this person on that. Well, it just means your knowledge is so, therefore I'm going to throw them out. It just means you're a fucking idiot, right? You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right?
Well,
You don't say stupid shit like that, you know. I'm sure if I went through Goebbels, I could find something I did that I agreed with them on, right? I mean, you don't just,
Goebbels wasn't wrong about everything.
yeah, I mean, Marx wasn't wrong about everything, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You say, well, I'm discounting the person. Well, that's shaming. That's not arguing. Does it make sense? That's,
Ah,
do you understand?
now,
Now
that
you're
was
shaming,
that
you're
was
not arguing.
now see that was excellent because now you've taken it from a masculine argument style
To a feminine.
feminine, and it's like stop acting like a little spoiled.
Like, well, that's what I say. Stop acting like a little bitch. This you are. And they fucking hate it. These little right wing noobs. Like, stop acting like a little bitch. Well, that's what you're doing, right? I mean, nobody. It's like like Richard and who's the other one? I mean, so there's a bunch of right wing guys. I think they're silly, right? But I absolutely respect them for trying.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
I mean, and it doesn't mean everything they say is wrong. Right? They're I think they're silly. They know I think they're silly because I've said it to them a little bit.
In case there was any question.
But they're silly. You get somebody like who's George Will, right? Very smart man, right? Says really stupid things once in a while, right? That he's just being silly, right? Who's the guy that never says anything stupid? Buchanan. I was amazed he never says anything
Buchanan. He's an interesting character.
Never says anything stupid. Never. I mean, it's fucking hysterical to me. Right? It's like it's almost impossible not to say something stupid, right? For anybody. He just doesn't say anything stupid. I don't know. I just
Got a
find
good
that.
regulator.
Well, the point is that this purity shit is feminine, right? This right wing purity nonsense. Because he doesn't absolutely positively agree with me. I mean, what you mean is your ignorance is sufficient level that you can't appreciate somebody's partly right and partly wrong. Right? You have to make it a feminine thing. You have to make it ostracization of the individual versus understanding that, well, we're all partly right and partly wrong. Right? You can't do that.
Right. We have preferences, and that messes us up.
But we have understandings. The common one, of course, is the classical liberal legal, like the ethnocentric and fascist, right? And the fundamentalist, right? These are three extremes of the religion and the
I like it. I like it because it's trifunctional.
Right. I mean, well, that's why I chose it. Right? Chose this three extremes, right? I mean, of course, everybody's going to say, well, Jesus said this, or well, the Nazis said this, or the anarchists said this, or it doesn't. I mean, that doesn't. You can't separate what they said that was stupid from what was smart, right? And so the problem is we all double down on what we know. So if you study physics, you're going to make a physics argument. You study social science, you're going to social. I mean, you study economics, you'll make it. I mean, it's the same stupid shit everybody does, right? We double down on what we know. Well, if you know fundamentalism, you know anarchism, anarchism, which is just, Nazism, right? Or fascism, right? You can double down on any of those because you think you're the right one. Well, you're partly right, and you're partly wrong. Partly wrong because obviously the other two people disagree with you. The 2 points of the compass disagree with you because they wouldn't want to live with you in control. Just like you don't want to live with them in control. Just like when you live with them in control, right? They don't want to be in control. They know that means chaos. Okay, so you don't want to live under chaos. You don't want to live under church authority. You don't want to live under martial authority. Okay, I understand. So what's the fucking problem here? The problem is you're all wrong. right? The answer is trifunctionalism requires we have all three, and that we cooperate on ends, on achieving on means, even if we envision different ends, and then we just float around in that triangle as needed. We're more martial, more faithful, more legal, right? More commercial as is necessary to adapt to the. I'm trying to move this around here inside the circle, inside the. You're moving around inside the triangle as we adapt. That's what trifunctionalism allows us to do, is continuously adapt by each of us pursuing our. But you don't ever assume you're right, like exclusively right. You don't assume that the way to do it is all under some monopoly, right? Where we all have to believe the same. And so the right always does stupid shit. That's why I just gave up on trying to reason with them, because it's just impossible. Because it's just as impossible to reason with the right, despite that they're systematizing and reasonable, than it is to the left, because they double down so hard on wherever they are in this fucking triangle, because they don't have enough general knowledge and to be able to appreciate it. So they give. It's like most people, right? They give up. You asked me a thing about why I kept drilling down, right? I kept drilling down from, well, what kind of arguments they make, to what kind of lies they make, to what are the difference in the lies they make, and what's the first principle. Because I drill down to first principle before I'm satisfied. I don't, but most people don't. They just get an answer that works and they stop.
That's right. It's economical.
Right. And so that's where they go, okay, I got something I'm a dog, I got a bone, I can, like, you ever the dog and you're like pulling on the tug toy, and it just holds there. Well, that's the guy who's stuck in fundamentalism, anarchy, or libertarianism, or fascism, right? They're stuck somewhere in there. But the truth is, most of the right wing is stuck somewhere, which is the problem. The left doesn't do that. The left just says, where's most people going? I'm going there too. Right. And so that's why the right fails, is they get this they get their status out of doubling down on their level of ignorance. And they might claim fundamentalism or anarchism or fascism is like they have deep knowledge of it. I know that's great, but it's like you have deep knowledge without the other two axes, which means you don't know how to falsify anything in your mind. You have to know all three in order to do one. What's the virtue of having Christian fundamentalism? What's the virtue of having ethno fundamentalism? What's the virtue of having your cooperative fundamentalism? Well, what's the difference is that each of them represents an aspect of life, and we adapt in between them. And if you only know one, it's like the guy who's walking around with a hammer looking for a nail,
right?
And not everything's a fucking nail. And then how do you fix the right on this? You don't. You have to educate them, because the natural desire of a man is to gain some sort of intellectual, moral advantage, right? He's going to seek that, and so he's going to seek that by some means somewhere on the triangle, right? And the problem with, once you begin to monopolize your understanding, right? You've crossed the border from true to self-reinforcing. In other words, from true and useful to self-justification. Now you might need. Go ahead. You understand? Did I blow that?
No, that was right. Now I'm just processing the information. That was perfectly said. Because you cross the line from seeking the truth to seeking justification for your position.
Correct. And so that's what happens is now what does neural economy tell us? It says, I don't want to go learn fundamentalism, or I don't want to learn anarchism or libertarianism. Except you have to learn all three in order to know which model best serves which circumstance. Well, I mean, fundamentalism in Christianity solves a fucking hard problem. Right, a really hard. It solves the hard problem. Social trust, forgiveness. What does rule of law solve? It solves decidability, reciprocity. It's another solves the problem of calculability. What is militarism or ethnocentrism solve? It solves the problem of defense. which is being a defense against undermining. Defense against undermining. So I mean, these are, and it serves the problem of justice, which is punishing the wicked. So defending the good and punishing the wicked. So I mean, the problem is, how do you know the good and the wicked? Well, you know that by the law. And how do you develop the trust to get along that way? It's because you have Christianity. So these things have to work together. And so what happens is everybody doubles down on their answer. When the answer is that's just what they know and they understand. And that's what we do, is we double down on what we know and we understand.
It goes to the image that came to my mind is the guy's out, the drinker's out in the middle of the night looking for his keys under the spotlight. And it's like, did you drop them here? No. Why are you looking here? That's where the light is. I can't see in the dark. Oh my.
All right, so that was my topic. So I was curious about whether this problem, can the Jewish problem and the female problem be brought into the discourse?
Okay.
In other words, is there any evidence that's going in any direction? Because I don't think we can resolve it.
I sense that it's surfacing,
Yes.
but I think that the email problem, because I was watching your guys' conversation from Thursday, and it had a similar subject matter, because you were talking about you specifically mentioned the crazy females of TikTok, and that the fact that they get to vote.
I mean, seriously, if you watch TikToks, it's like obvious why our ancestors thought women have no political participation. And it's like this confessional. Like they openly go into this confessional and they state what they really think. And you realize they're fucking crazy. I'm not sure. You could actually argue they're evil. And so
I haven't seen these TikToks. That's interesting.
I don't recommend you spend any of your life on a particular problem. I have a morbid curiosity in in people's various forms of insanity and dishonesty, right?
Right.
And this is a subject matter which they're providing the best evidence ever produced in social science, right? Because it's voluntary.
Confessionals, right?
Right, and it's like, it's amazing how cross spectrum it is.
Huh.
Right, and so I look at it like it's races, it's ages, it's classes. It does appear to be biased a little more toward the lower classes, but I mean, if you want to talk about fucking crazy, these women are crazy, and they're literally crazy, because their grasp of reality is so self-centered that it's beyond it's hard to imagine you could be that far off.
Huh.
That lacking in self-awareness, because you're that full of self-obsession. It's just amazing to me. And the range.
So narcissistic.
Well, this is interesting, because I would call it narcissistic, but technically speaking, that's a masculine expression, the way they diagnosed it. In other words, it's actually some sort of solipsistic. In other words, I probably should do a piece on that, because the way the DSM-5 organizes this, they classify it, is they classify narcissism in a way that males express the behavior.
Oh.
Whereas the way females express the behavior, I think is closer to solipsism. Let me leave that as an open issue to resolve, and I'll try to make an hour to resolve that this week.
Right.
But, so we would, I mean, as a person, you would say it's narcissistic, right? In other words, but it tends to, but what I think is really going on is solipsism, is they can't imagine their feelings are other than real. Right?
Huh.
It's a very self-centered thing versus self-aggrandizement, which is, I think,
Oh, I see.
I think it's more solipsistic versus.
Oh.
Yeah, but in general, if you wanted to neutralize, it's like, okay, what's the difference? Well, the difference is you're too impressed with yourself by one raise the other.
One means or the other, right? Yeah.
What means the other, the male female means. I suppose that's probably okay to keep in the common vernacular, but in the way they do it, in the
The DSM.
DSM and when they do it.
Just interesting as I would just like to discuss the DSM briefly as a institution for cultural production, which happens to be occupied territory.
Well, I think we're working on fixing that, right? That's what we're doing. Right? We're creating the formal logic of psychology, right? We've done it, but then we have to. But we're talking about truths and falsehoods, and they're talking about manifested behaviors.
Yes.
So we're doing causality, and they're describing behaviors because they don't know causality. So when I go through the DSM, it is again feminine with a feminine bias, and it doesn't include systematizing over empathizing, nor does it include responsibility versus irresponsibility or spirit. Right. And this is true in the personality tests, right? It doesn't include systematizing versus empathizing. It doesn't include responsibility versus irresponsibility. It doesn't include intelligence versus lack of it. And so I think the problem is that when we look at the big five, right? The big five, we had intelligence, the big six.
Yep.
These things are an attempt to be neutral about a thing that's only interesting because it's not. In other words, they got psychology backwards. The cause of all our differences is sex differences. So the way you know something is true or false is because you can describe the behavior from the masculine bimodally. If you can't describe it bimodally, you can't be right. Does that make sense? Because it has to be manifest in both sexes. So, I mean, though that's how we do it, right? We did the big sex differences in this whole fucking chart there. And so if you can't describe it bimodally, it doesn't, you're actually got it wrong, right? Because that's the only way you know what causality is. So my problem with the DSM is it doesn't start with the first principle of bimodality, which is
right. It should, because it's like should be distributed, and it should be described in sex, gender specificity.
Yeah, I don't. This is something you corrected me on. Sex is physical, gender is behavioral, right? I mean, I'm okay with that distinction, right? I mean, that's not how the words came about, but if we're going to have to disambiguate it, sex is a physical manifestation because it's your gene, it's your chromosomes, right? That's going to produce that. But gender is developmental, and it can be fucked with, right? So it can be defective, right? Just like, well, I mean, if you've seen the images of African women with clitori that are as large as penises, which is don't go look, because if you haven't looked,
you don't wanna, you can't
unsee it. It's fucking horrible to me. My disgust response goes off the goddamn scale. I'm like, I go into Spartan mode, throw it off the cliff, onto the rocks. Well, so the sex is whatever, but their chromosomes do say what you are, right? You do physically manifest this, but you can behaviorally maladapt. right? You can, because it's an organizational thing rather than it's an organization. So, sure, homosexuality is a birth defect, but it's not a catastrophic one. It's just a part of it's part of a normal distribution that you would expect to happen. The problem is why it's growing right now, and sperm count is going down, and fertility is going down. We're obviously doing something environment. It might just be exercise, but we're doing something environmentally that's causing it. But the point, to get back to your point, if you haven't got bimodality or sexual dimorphism as the origin of any psychological behavior, then you can't manifest it. You can't talk about the masculine, feminine manifestations, and then you won't see them as a spectrum, and then you won't be able to diagnose correctly. And so the DSM encourages what you're saying. Right? The problem I have with the most psychologists that I know, that I talk to about this matter, and thankfully I have a couple of close friends who are very, very skilled in this, and they don't want me to mention them.
Say that again?
They don't want me to mention them.
I understand.
I find women are better at this, actually. It's easier to talk to women about it because they're more curious about it. But the hard part is the irresponsibility issue, right? As the foundation. And of this, in other words, how those things manifest in the sexes is basically just the responsibility versus irresponsibility.
Well, it's like it's like responsibility seeking versus avoidance.
Yeah, I mean, which is fucking obvious, right? But that's the first cause of sexual dimorphism, right? And so once you look at, if you were to look at mental illness or mental problems, psychological issues, as under this bimodal spectrum, right, masculine, feminine distribution, all of a sudden you think things make so much sense, because what you're really trying to discover is what response. Oh, no, I had to do this myself, my own curiosity. What responsibility are you trying to have or avoid? Or, I mean, and why are you frustrated? What fear do you have about doing it? What? Another problem I had with psychologists was teaching them myself was that I'm not afraid of anything. That's the problem. Right? I mean, the problem you keep coming up with is that what you see as a fear. This is something I had to go through back in the day, right? I say, I'm not afraid of anything. Basically I'm running myself into the ground all the time, right? I'm not afraid of anything. That's a problem. I said, so it's
that is a problem. It's a defect.
It's that I love the competition, right? It's a different thing. And so you say, well, if I have an opportunity for seeking responsibility, I chase it like a fucking mad dog chasing a truck. That's what I have to regulate. So you keep trying to find this thing I'm afraid of. I was like, I mean, not many kids grow up with a shotgun. Their father's threatening them with a shotgun in the head, right? I mean, you become unafraid. I mean, just like soldiers become unafraid. You become unafraid, right? I'm not afraid. I don't have like normal healthy fear, right? I have
You have abnormal, unhealthy fearlessness.
Yes. So it's that I view things as frustration, right, rather than as fear. Right.
I understand you.
Right, and I say, if women would talk to men that way, they would understand that frustration is the inability to obtain the responsibility we seek, whereas fear is the inability to avoid responsibility we wish to. And so,
wait, say that one more time.
Fear is the inability to avoid responsibility we wish to, or the consequences of responsibility. And so whenever you're talking to men, that's why men get revolted about therapy. That's why it's revolting. It's actually, you make therapy, whenever you say it's about fear, or it's about acquiescence, or it's about coming to terms, those are very female things. A man wants to know how to carry the burden. He doesn't want to know how to avoid it. The woman wants to know how to avoid the burden. The man wants to know how to carry it. And I'm like, well, this is the problem with that's what's wrong with psychology. that because it's not based on first principles, and it's organized to create neutrality, equality, instead of bimodalism, which is the origin of all the differences. I mean, if the origin of everything we do, all differences behavior is by the bimodality of the sexual dimorphism, right? In cognitive behavioral dimorphism, then the fact that you're trying to unify them is simply obscuring the information necessary to obtain the value that you wish to extract from the discipline. What I'm saying is pretty profound. I hope it's coming across. But I mean,
I'm understanding you and I'm processing it. It's like, and I'm trying to write it down in my little notebook, and I'm sure that it is crossing over the barrier of the screen.
it's just really, so all human behaviors are just like, what are you trying to get responsibility for or avoid? What truth are you telling yourself, or what lie are you telling yourself, and why? Right? And just trying to get there. And so the problem is that that the female method doesn't work on men, which is why men are frustrated, and so many men need psychological help. But they're being told to be effeminate, and it's disgusting.
I understand.
It's so obvious. So it's like I'm talking to them like, I know, I tell them beforehand, because I believe in therapy, obviously, because
Yeah.
I use it like a doctor.
Right.
If I have a problem, I go to a fucking therapist. Why? Because I don't want to burden my family, my wife, whatever.
Right.
Right. And frankly, it's really hard to talk to yourself honestly about stuff that's auto-associative.
No, there's a good value to having somebody making you face up to something that you may prefer to
Or
avoid.
just ask the right fucking question. I mean, because you
That's
don't,
right.
because the problem is, what I've noticed with the really good ones is they just ask the right question. And it turns out that we're all the same. The right question is always the same, but you need to hear it at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they ask this question. So you're like, okay, so sometimes I go for 3 visits. I've gone for 1 visit, and so, all right, I'm like, I just don't understand what the fuck's going on. What did I do wrong here? Right. Another time, 3 visits to get over my girlfriend in Ukraine. That was like 6 months. To deal with my mother, like living with my mother,
I'm sure.
I need a fucking outlet, because otherwise I'm going to use a pillow. I'm being sarcastic, but I wouldn't really smother her with a pillow, but I might think about it if I didn't have an outlet. So
Hi.
that was awful. I should take that one back, but it was too funny to not say. Anyway, it really was horrible. But so my thing about therapy is I wish more guys would do it. But then when you go to a therapist, I have to tell them, I've been going to therapists as needed since I was in high school, and it's been really valuable for me. Right? I understand how it's done, right? And I want to explain that I'm autistic and I'm on the margin, right? So I'm not in the middle of any bell curve.
Right.
You can't think of me as normal, right? Because you'll get the wrong. And the last thing is, I'm a man. I'm not a woman. I don't have any fear. And they don't really get it until a while. And then you start correcting them. Well, I have to translate that female speech into male speech. But I do it through the kind of work we do, which is, okay, so what you're telling me is like, I need to learn how to be irresponsible. And I find that disgusting. They hate that, right? You're telling
When you tell them that
that
they're telling you to be irresponsible.
Irresponsible means they're telling me to be effeminate, and I'm saying I that's disgusting to me. And they just for some reason that
It's a magic word.
That's a magic word. And so you say, a man wants to know how to carry. He wants to how to make my shoulders broader so I can carry the burden. I don't want to avoid it. Right? Whereas a woman wants a means of avoiding the burden, because the burden for her is from within, and the burden for man is from without. Going to do with reality. They internalize. Right. So I think, so thank you for bringing this subject up, because it's very interesting to me. I mean, it's an interesting problem, because it is that fucked up. I mean, it's the reason the social sciences are fucked up. It's the reason psychology is fucked up. It's the reason government is fucked up. It's because this belief in oneness, when all the value comes from our differences, and all the value and all the differences come from bimodalism. And all bimodalism comes from empathizing versus systematizing, and responsibility versus irresponsibility. It comes from those two things. And once you realize that, then you can construct, you can still use ocean and these kind of things you're trying to eat. But you simply go to the fact of what now, if you're using, let's go back to narcissism. Well, we tend to mean that in the male sense of self-aggrandizement. And which is an externally facing thing, versus the female sense of aggrandizement, which is an internal thing, which is an internal thing. And so what I call solipsism.
Yeah.
It's just this reveling in your own emotions as if they're a truth. It's reveling in your own self-pride or self-aggrandizement as if it's a truth. It's a kind of revelings. So they're kinds of, what are you trying to accomplish by this? What lie are you telling yourself? You know?
Right.
I'd love to wake up in the morning and be 6'2". Not gonna fucking happen.
Right.
All right, so now I've filled up our 2.5 hours. I feel good.
You feel good? Limbered up?
We had a fun talk today. We've had 3 weeks now of really good, three weekends of really good stuff.
I enjoyed it. I thought we got through some good material, and it was very interesting for my taste.
So I'm gonna go and go take some small bites out of the elephant this week. And hopefully I'll have something for you to work on me with. At most, it will be next week, but this I'm gonna try this week.
Well, very good.
I think I might be there. We'll see. I have to finish my dishes. My house has gone from frat to bachelor pad
Uh-oh.
to the kids have been home all weekend, right? Or all week or something like that. I got to get it up to the next level, which is we're working too much. That's okay. My house can be at that level of mess. Kind of got out of hand there. And it's only 20 minutes, right, to clean up the fucking place.
That's how I judge it. I go, okay, like it doesn't take too much. Just like this, is put in some time, make it go, and then the inertia of beginning is the key factor. Because once you overcome the starting inertia, it's just a quick little chore.
Love you, brother. Thank you for today's chat. Thank you for yesterday's chat.
I enjoyed both. And I want everybody to hit like and subscribe right down there below. Leave the comments. Episode 2093.
Thank you. I love all of you. The change in atmosphere that's happening right now. I don't know how much of it has to do with Kanye and Musk and whatever, but I am sort of digging it, and I'm digging the honesty of conversation that's happening. Even if some of it's crazy, I'm digging. All right,
That's
love
right.
you guys.
Bye, Kurt.